Welcome to this video about General Writing Task 1 and how it's scored. And for this lesson, I'm going to be using specifically the criteria for achieving a Band 7 in General Writing Task 1. And if you're not looking to get a Band 7, working towards it will definitely help you get the score you need. And this will help give you a good benchmark for making sure you accomplish everything you need to accomplish and get the score you need in General Writing Task 1. So let's get started and look at the criteria that's required for getting the score that's a Band 7, specifically in General Writing Task 1. There are 4 criteria that go with writing task 1, and this is the same for academic and general, but in this case, we're specifically applying it to the general exam where you have to write a letter of 150 words. So first of all, you have task achievement, and this means that you give an appropriate response to the task. It means that your letter is exactly what it needs to be according to the topic and the reason for writing and the tone that you need to use for writing your letter. I'm going to explain these each in detail, so stay with me and you'll have the exact details of how to score a Band 7 in this task. The second is coherence and cohesion, and really this is how you structure your letter, how you put everything into the letter that needs to be there, and you also avoid putting things that don't need to be there or are irrelevant to the letter. And then you have lexical resource, which is using the appropriate vocabulary. And this doesn't mean having fancy words or special phrases. Appropriate vocabulary is a vocabulary that's useful for the task. The kind of vocabulary that you need to use to either write a formal or informal letter. You don't want to use vocabulary that doesn't suit the purpose or the tone of your letter. And then you have grammatical range and accuracy, which means just using the correct forms. And again, useful for the task. It doesn't have to be complex or complicated. It just has to be appropriate and useful and the kind of grammar that you can use without making a lot of mistakes. So let's look specifically at each one of these and how it applies to writing task 1 and writing your letter. The first is task achievement. So for Band 7, there are 2 points here that are important for the general writing task 1. First of all, it covers the requirements of the task. You have to respond directly to the task that you're given. And secondly, we'll skip the middle point. That applies more to the academic task 1. But for general writing and for writing your letter, you clearly present and highlight key features, the bullet points that you're given, but you want to extend them and you want to add more details. Again, they have to be relevant, but you want to be able to extend and elaborate on the bullet points that you're given. And for task 7, there may be things that you could do better, but for task 7, you want to make sure that you meet these minimum requirements. So for example, let's say we're asked to write a letter and it says you have borrowed something from your friend and got it damaged. So you write a letter to your friend, and in the letter you have to include 3 things. You have to apologize for the damage to the item, you have to explain what happened, and you have to say how you're going to fix the issue. And this is so important that you cover these 3 bullet points. So let me give you some tips to make sure that your task achievement requirements are met. First of all, you have to write 150 words and you have 20 minutes to do it. And I would say that out of this 20 minutes, you're going to spend at least 5 minutes planning your essay, your letter, and then you're going to spend 15 minutes writing it, because you can write a much better letter in 15 minutes than you can in 20 without doing this planning stage. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in just a moment. Then you have to clearly state the reason that you're writing. So before you even get to the bullet points, you have to clearly state why you're writing this letter. So the topic of this letter is right in the first line of the prompt. You have borrowed something from your friend and it got damaged. So the very first thing that you're going to include in your letter is to say, I'm sorry to tell you that the tool that I borrowed from you has been damaged, and that's it. You just want to make sure that that's very clear right from the outset of your letter. And then you go into the bullet points where you have to state the reason for the damage. You want to explain what happened, and you want to say how you're going to fix the issue. This is the reason for your letter, to state these 3 things. You have to decide on the tone, and obviously if you're writing to a friend, it's going to be an informal tone. So make sure that your letter does not include formal vocabulary and writing style. You want to stick with writing the way that you would just talk to your friend on an everyday basis. And you want to make sure that you cover each bullet point. You want to apologize for the damage. You want to explain how it was damaged. And you want to say what you're going to do to fix the issue. So that's task achievement. Then we come to coherence and cohesion. And that means for level 7, to logically organize information and ideas. There's a clear progression throughout. The progression of your letter is directly related to that prompt that you're given. And you use a range of cohesive devices. And this simply means that you transition from one paragraph to another effectively, or from one sentence to another. It has a logical flow, and you demonstrate these cohesive devices, which is vocabulary, for joining your ideas together. So when we look at the structure, the coherence of our letter, we're going to make sure it includes the clear statement, respond directly, and then it's going to include an apology for damage. It's going to include an explanation, and it's going to say what your plan is to resolve or fix the issue. And if your letter includes everything that's given to you in the prompt, you will have a coherent and cohesive letter. And I'm going to give you some tips specifically about doing this. So how to have a solid structure. First of all, you just begin with saying, "Dear friend," and then you say why you're writing. I've borrowed something and it's become damaged. And then I'm going to give some details about the damaged item and apologize. I'm going to mention the item. And then my second paragraph is going to explain how it happened. Okay, and that's it's directly given in the prompt. And then I'm going to give details about how I will fix it, how I will get it fixed, and then I'm just going to sign off, "Your friend so and so." This is all that has to be included when it comes to the structure of your letter. And you don't want to include more than this, because then you get into the idea of adding details that aren't relevant to the task. So if you don't have a solid structure and you include things that aren't necessary, then your task achievement score, as we just talked about, will suffer and be lower. So the solid structure is not only going to give you a good score for coherence and cohesion, it's going to reinforce task achievement. And that's how these two go together. And all four of the requirements that we're looking at have to be there to get a level 7. So if one is missing, your score is going to drop. So the solid structure is a simple structure. Simply follow the prompt that you're given and organize your essay accordingly. And as I've already mentioned, take the time to plan this for 5 minutes before you start writing, because that 15 minutes where you do write will give you a much better letter than you don't than if you wrote for 20 minutes without carefully planning it and structuring it. Then we have lexical resource, and this is simply your vocabulary. So you want to use a sufficient range of vocabulary. So it has to be at a level that displays your high intermediate or advanced level of English, and it has to be flexible and precise, which means that you're not going to make a lot of errors. So for a level 7, you don't have to write perfectly and have perfect vocabulary. It just has to show sufficient range to reach a level 7. And the way that you do this is to use less common lexical items, and you keep the right style and collocation. And collocation is just how words go together and phrases that you use. Now, this is where you need to be very careful. Less common lexical items, less common vocabulary doesn't mean fancy, overly academic, or strange, very uncommon vocabulary. It just means that you don't want to keep repeating the same words, but it doesn't have to be anything that's outside of the language that you would use on an everyday basis. And this also means that you're maintaining the right tone. And tone means informal or formal. And we're looking at a very informal. We're writing a letter to a friend. So if you include formal vocabulary in your letter to a friend, you will lose marks no matter how good the vocabulary is. It has to be useful and appropriate for writing an informal letter. So don't be tempted to try to put really uncommon or fancy words into your letter, because that's not the way you speak on an everyday basis. That's not informal. That's not an informal tone. So be very careful when it comes to vocabulary. Stay in the range of your vocabulary, your ability to use useful and appropriate vocabulary, where you feel very confident that you're not making a lot of errors, because it's okay to have a few errors in your vocabulary and still reach a band 7. Where you will lose more marks is if you go out on a limb and risk too much with trying to use words that you're not confident using. So this is lexical resource. Make sure it's useful, make sure it's appropriate, but that's in the range of vocabulary that you can use confidently, comfortably, and competently. And then, the most important thing when it comes to lexical resource or vocabulary is to be accurate. You don't want to make a lot of mistakes. If you make a few little mistakes, that's not going to jeopardize your Band 7 score, but you have to be as accurate as possible. Then the vocabulary that you do use has to be useful and appropriate to the topic of your letter. Okay, you don't want to try and insert, for example, let's say you memorized a lot of fancy words that you hope to be able to use in your letter. But if they're not useful and appropriate, it doesn't matter how fancy those words are, they're not going to raise your score. And a matter of fact, they could jeopardize your score and cause it to be lower. And then really focus on tone. If you're asked to write an informal letter, use everyday common language, just as if you were speaking to a friend face to face. This is the language that's used in writing an informal letter. So do not use formal phrases or formal vocabulary. And then the final tip, as I mentioned already, use words that are within your confidence level. Use words that you feel very confident using. And if you have that high, intermediate, or advanced level of English that's required for getting a Band 7 in the IELTS exam, you will have more words at your disposal than you really need. Just stay with the ones that you can use with confidence. Let's move on to the fourth and last criteria, and this is grammatical range and accuracy. And the first point says uses a variety of complex structures. I want to be clear that when it comes to grammar, complex does not mean complicated. It means that you can use basically three different styles of sentences. You can use simple sentences, you can use compound sentences, and you can use complex compound sentences. Let me just give you some examples of these three types of sentences and how uncomplicated they are. First of all, a simple sentence. I eat breakfast every day. A simple sentence. A compound sentence. I eat breakfast every day because it helps me maintain my health. It's a compound sentence just joined together with the conjunction because. It's really just putting two simple sentences together. And then if I just add a simple phrase to a compound sentence, I have a complex compound sentence. So in my opinion, it's important to eat breakfast every day because it helps to maintain my health. So the vocabulary is the same, the structure is the same, but I've shown a range and a variety of structures. And that's all that's necessary for a band sentence. And then the second criteria is to produce frequent error-free sentences. Again, if you make one or two mistakes, you'll be okay. But if you make too many grammatical mistakes, it will lower your score. And the danger here is if you try to get too complicated, you'll make more errors. So keep it simple. Show a wide variety, 3 or 4 different types of sentences, and make them clear and grammatically accurate. And then has a good control of grammar and punctuation. Punctuation is a part of grammar, but again, in an informal letter, you'd be keeping this very simple, and it shouldn't cause a problem. And now we're ready to write our letter and meet these 4 criteria with the right grammatical range and accuracy tips. Be accurate. Now, let me just give you another aspect of grammar that's so important, and it's making sure that you use the right grammar tenses. So, for example, it's clear in here when I look at the prompt, apologize for the damage, explain what happened, and say how you're going to fix it. These 3 bullet points clearly represent 3 grammar tenses. First of all, apologize for the damage. When I apologize for the damage, I'm going to say, your vacuum cleaner is damaged. I'm going to use the present tense. When I explain what happened, I'm using past tense. And then if I say what I'm going to do to fix the issue, I'm going to use future. So I can quite simply write 1 paragraph in present tense, write 1 paragraph in past tense, and write 1 paragraph using the future. It's not complicated. It's simply using straightforward, not complicated grammar, tenses, and structures. And this is how to get a band 7 in writing task 1 for the general exam. So here is the sample of how my letter would turn out. Dear John, I am writing to let you know that unfortunately something terrible has happened. I broke the vacuum cleaner you lent me last week. So I'm clearly stating why I'm writing in the topic. I am writing to let you know that unfortunately something terrible has happened. Present continuous with present perfect, and then I start going into past tense. I'm really sorry that I was careless enough to let this happen. I was vacuuming the carpet in my living room and a big clump of dog hair got sucked up. It overloaded the motor and there was smoke coming from it. The motor's burned out and doesn't work anymore. Again, just simple present, present continuous, simple past. I will take it to get repaired. There's an appliance shop near my house and the owner said he can have it working within a few days. As soon as it's fixed, I'll bring it back to you. So I'm sure as you look at this letter, there's not any vocabulary that's totally strange to you. There's not any complicated grammar structures that you can't identify and use effectively. So use this as your example. I hope you found this helpful. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and see the other video that I've done on how you can accomplish the task required in general writing task 1, and you'll find hundreds of videos for every section and question type and strategy that you need to have an effective preparation and be fully ready for the IELTS exam.